I will stay near the podium because I need to hold on to something. I'm going to call an audible 2. I was going to spend a few minutes giving you a very, very, very brief history of consumer protection in the U.S. and West Virginia, but I'm throwing that under the bus so I can talk a little bit about Copper Beach and some related stuff. But there's some stuff in the materials. I'm throwing my outline under the bus too. But let me thank Jonathan. One thing we share in common, we love this consumer protection stuff. I could talk about it all day. In my former life, I was a legal aid lawyer, typically representing battered women in child custody cases. That was some very stressful stuff, let me tell you. So when I came to work for the Attorney General's office, I thought, well, I'm not going to get as stressed out fighting about property and money, but all of you know, you can get very stressed out about that too. And I've really grown to appreciate it. I knew very little about consumer protection before I came to the AG and learned a lot here. And many of you in this room have helped me learn, so I appreciate that on both sides. There are good people on both sides of these cases. So even a lot of private lawyers that do consumer protection cases don't really know that much about how the Attorney General's office works. So I'm going to take a little look behind the curtain. The West Virginia Consumer Credit and Protection Act was passed in 1974. Around that time, many states were passing consumer protection laws. Basically, the act was created to protect individuals who purchase goods or services from merchants. So it doesn't apply in purchases. If you're an individual and you buy something from another individual, it doesn't apply. Business to business transactions doesn't apply. Literally, there's a definition of consumer transaction in the act. It says, I don't know if this is an exact quote, but basically a purchase of goods or services from a merchant for a personal, family, household, or agricultural purpose. And to me, that definition is pretty important because it doesn't anywhere say what it includes. It also doesn't say what it excludes. That's a little kind of lead into Copper Beach later. So it's very broad. As you know, typical things covered: purchases of cars, appliances, electronics, household goods. Covers things like home improvement contractors. That's a nightmare for everybody to hire home improvement contractors. Don't go to Home Advisor if you think you're going to get good advice. You're not, or any of that stuff. It covers loans, telemarketing. There's so much stuff that are covered. Enforcement of the act. To me, the theme that was set up was that this law would be enforced both by private lawyers and by the state through the West Virginia Attorney General's office. And the act created the Consumer Protection Division to enforce the act. And to me, the only way the act can be enforced in an effective manner is if those two components are working, both enforcement through the private bar by so-called special assistant attorneys general and through the Attorney General's office. Both sides have to pull their weight. Just a couple of things about what the private lawyers do, because there are some very, very expert private lawyers here who've done this for years. But essentially, in a private action, as I understand it, they can seek actual damages for the consumer, a civil penalty of up to $1,000 per violation, and I think it's capped at $175,000. Attorney's fees, and of course that's a key thing, because if lawyers couldn't get attorney's fees to do these cases could not and would not be brought. And there's a 4-year statute of limitations on the violation in the private cases. Now, in Attorney General actions, the law generally says that the Attorney General can receive and act on complaints, can investigate and bring civil actions. And I kind of, the way I explain this to groups, I call it the 4 shuns, which are education, mediation, investigation, and litigation. You could say what I'm doing today is education. We speak to groups, we issue press releases, we prepare pamphlets, we have an attorney on call every week, and that's also part of education, not only to consumers, but also to businesses who call. We get a lot of calls from car dealers who want to know, well, how do I do a legal repossession? I almost wish I didn't have to tell them, but I do. Or sometimes a landlord calls, they want to know how I can do a legal eviction. Well, I'll tell them what the law requires. Mediation, this is a big component of what we do. It's really a misnomer. People call, we have 2 receptionists who answer the phones, and when you call our office, you do get to speak to a human being. It's something that we're very proud of. If you call many consumer protection divisions in other states, you won't get a human being answering the phone in most cases. And they figure out if the person seems to be calling about a consumer matter, if so, and if they want us to get involved, they'll mail out a complaint form. When we get the complaint form, we set up a file, and we mail it out to the business with a very non-threatening cover letter. If we don't get a response, we send it out with another non-threatening cover letter. And after that, if we don't get a response, or maybe we do get a response and it's maybe unsatisfactory to the consumer or to us, the file will be reviewed by whichever lawyer is on call that week. And that lawyer will decide whether it should be referred to a staff lawyer for a closer look. So when we get one of those files referred to us, it doesn't automatically mean that the law was violated or that we should do something more, but we do take a closer look. Usually when one of the lawyers refers a file to us, there is something more to it. And when I get one of these files, I kind of approach it like a doctor. You know, you go to the doctor's office, you say, hey doc, I got this stomach ache, but they're gonna examine the whole person. It's not just about what you complained about, it's what else is going on. So if we get just for example, we get a complaint against a used car dealer, typical complaints are about a crappy car that the dealer won't fix. So, and that alone is tough for us. But what we want to look at is all the sales papers. Was there a buyer's guide posted on the car? Did they give it to you? Does the sales paper say that it was sold as is? If it was a buy here, pay here dealer, did they disclose the terms and conditions of financing in the way required by federal law? So that's the stuff that matters. And when we see that stuff, our mission is always to look global. So in one sense, certainly it's part of our mission to get relief for consumers who have been wronged in some way, to get refunds and restitution. But our larger mission is really to enforce the law, because we are a regulatory agency. And when we can accomplish all of those things, that's really the gold standard. So that's what happens when we look at the file. If we think there's cause, if we think the law is being violated, we might open a formal investigation. It might be as simple as a phone call to the business. And I always like to call a business owner personally before they get lawyered up to find out what's going on, introduce myself. Then we might ask for some documents and information by a letter. If it doesn't look like we're going to get cooperation, we do have subpoena power. That's really, really important thing, and it has to be used properly. Once you go through all of that stuff, if you go through an investigation, and we would then usually send a letter to the business outlining our concerns, letting them know what we want as a possible resolution without going to court. We call it a demand letter. These kind of letters always have to be approved by the Attorney General. And the goal is always to settle the case without going to court. But if a business won't accept a reasonable offer, then we do have the right to file a suit in court. So that's the litigation part of the 4 shuns. And actually, the litigation part is the part I hate the least. I will bend over backwards and do all kinds of flip-flops to settle these cases without going to court. Because once you're in court and in litigation, it takes you away from a lot of day-to-day things that you could be doing. But we do have to do it. Ooh, I haven't been looking at the time. So when we do go for that fourth shun litigation, here's what we can seek. We can seek a temporary and permanent injunction. We can seek the full array of equitable relief. And that equitable relief is really the biggie of what we do, because that covers everything under the sun. That's how we get restitution and refunds. That's how we can get disgorgement of ill-gotten gains. We can get debt cancellation. We can get accounts removed from credit reports. And really importantly, under equitable relief now allows us to be reimbursed for our attorney's fees. Ooh, 5 minutes, that's bad. We can also get civil penalties of $5,000 per violation. Oh, I didn't even know that was up there. I tried to come up with a cutesy title just to make things interesting, so I called it, can't remember what I called it, Your Home, Your Car, Your Money, Your Privacy, Our State. And I think I came up with that because when I look at what we do, most everything we do falls into these four categories. Things that protect your home, like mortgage foreclosures, home improvement contractors, evictions, mobile home parks. I'll come back to that in a second. Protecting your cars. You buy a crappy car, they won't fix it. If you're a low income person, you spend all your money buying the car. You don't have any money left to repair it. You know, so people can lose their homes, they can lose their cars. Your money, payday lending. We spent years fighting internet payday lenders, which were clearly violations of our law, charging 600 or 800% interest. They said, oh, we don't have to comply with your law. These loans are made in Utah or Delaware or wherever. We said, no, they're made right here in West Virginia. The consumer got on their computer in West Virginia. You deposited the money into their account in West Virginia. You collected it from their account, and we basically won that battle. So all the internet payday lenders have really been driven out, except for one category. There's a category of lenders that now claim to be Indian tribes. That's a very tricky proposition, and we don't have time to get into that. But other than that, we have driven internet payday lenders out of the state. We're very proud of that. Your privacy. That's the category I know the least about, but it is a big issue. There's a data breach law that we enforce. What else on privacy? Identity theft, that's a biggie. Social media, I know little about it, except that's a big deal. So let me go to Copper Beach. That was my case, and I need a couple of minutes here. I think I became interested in tenants' rights about 50 years ago. Probably started in college when I was harassed by a landlord. He would come at 6 a.m. Saturday morning, pounding on the door, demanding the rent. And after the third time he did it, I finally thought, you know what? I'm not putting up with this anymore. So the third time I met him at the door in my underwear. You don't want to see that. And I just said, don't you ever, ever, ever do that again. I will pay you the rent when I get good and ready. And my roommate, he was terrified. Like, oh my God, you're going to get us evicted. So I think that's where it started. And then in the 70s, I was preparing some tenants' rights pamphlets for legal aid in Miami. And then in law school at Antioch, late 70s, I worked in the landlord-tenant clinic. In legal aid, I probably tried to defend hundreds of eviction cases. And even when they didn't always have merit, you had to at least try to buy people time so they wouldn't become homeless. That mattered to me. And so I'm proud of what I did. So this Copper Beach stuff came around. Anybody who lived in Morgantown, lived in those apartments, you know that you and your parents were being horribly exploited by the landlords with all kinds of ridiculous, bogus fees. So you have that. And then in legal aid, the typical issue with tenants there is unsafe housing conditions. And when you bring those cases to court, no matter how horrendous the conditions were, typically a judge would say, oh, if it was so bad, why did you stay? And that makes me think of the domestic violence cases. oh, if the abuse was so bad, why didn't you leave? And they're both wrong. So I've had that in my gut for a long, long time. And the Copper Beach case, I just want to say, we weren't trying to expand anything. We believe the law was very clear as it was. There was a West Virginia Supreme Court case in 1979 called Teller versus McCoy. To me, what it said very clearly is that a tenant of a modern apartment building is clearly entering into a contract for a purchase of goods or services that's no different from any other consumer contract. And that was kind of the foundation of the case. And now that the case is lost, first of all, let me say, as far as the court saying, oh, this was a highly regulated area, that is just absolutely not the case. The landlords in West Virginia have almost no regulation. There's only two laws that I know of. There's a law that says landlords are responsible for paying the cost of paying for to the upkeep and repairs, and there's recently a law that governs return of damage deposits. There's nothing else. So by losing Copper Beach, the tenants now, no private lawyer will take the case. It's not a consumer law, so there's no fee shifting. Now the Attorney General can't do it. There is nobody to help tenants, and it's most of greatest concern with the low-income people who can't afford lawyers. Personally, that was the greatest, most disappointing loss of my legal career, and I almost wish we had never brought the case, because not only did we lose, it also made some bad law. If we had never brought the case, the ambiguity that was there maybe would have survived. So it's sad for me, but we fought the good fight. But anyway, thanks a lot. And anybody wants to talk Copper Beach more, I'm here. Sandy.